daydreaming about dragons. That's what we're up to. That's what we're doing here. It's a tabletop role-playing game podcast, which I'll talk about techniques, what I do to get my games going. I hope they're helpful. I hope they inspire something in you. If there's something you do about any of this stuff that is like it, but a little different, you'd like to share, it makes you go, hey, wait a minute. Send me an email. All that information will be in the outro. I will look forward to hearing from you. Let's get to it. So let's talk about something I do as a GM when I've got a game and I want to walk through it, right? This could be if I've got a dungeon crawl. So I did this when I was running Dungeon Crawl Classics. And what I found is that running games out of a module is a totally different skill. Totally different than doing what I've done my whole life. I just felt like I was using totally different muscles. I felt like I was swimming one kind of stroke, and then suddenly I was being asked to swim in a totally different way, in a totally different direction. And it was challenging. And the other challenging thing I was finding about running, especially a dungeon crawl out of a module, is that the important parts of the room, right? Because sometimes there's a really key element, are not necessarily highlighted in the box text. And I don't want to I don't like memorizing the box text. I'm not going to do that. And it's just not my style. I don't like reading the box text. I want to kind of get a vibe for it and make it my own. But sometimes it's like the third paragraph down or hidden in that first paragraph, they mention that there are 2 keys hidden in the muck pile. And if you forget to describe the muck pile, there are no keys in there, and then they can't get to the super secret room or whatever later. They've got no chop. And if you over accentuate the muck pile, there's a muck pile, wink, wink, wink. Then are you making it too easy for them? I don't know. So this is a tool I use, what I'm about to talk about. I also do it when I'm running an investigative game right now, set in Duskfall, the setting for Blades in the Dark. And one of the things I like to do is talk about the crime scene that the investigators are going to come to, and what the murderer is doing, and how they're doing it, and what their drives are. And it's a nice way to walk through it. So what are you talking about, Jeb? What do you do? Well, sometimes I sit down with my wife, Janaki, and I just walk through it, right? But in doing that, I realized I've been doing this kind of thing my whole life. And as my friends, gaming buddies, have moved all over the place, and email became ubiquitous, which happened in my lifetime, because I'm ancient, I would do this with everybody, right? I would send out emails to folks who weren't in a game, and I would say, hey, this is what's happening in the game, and go over it and get their thoughts. So the nice thing about this is it turns a potentially sad thing, right? Oh, my gaming friends moved away, into an asset. Because suddenly you can just go over things. And I like doing it over email, but the real, I think, secret sauce magic is when you kind of go over it verbally. Because it's almost like rehearsing your game. Right? That's kind of what you're doing, which is pretty neat and pretty valuable. Thinking about your game out loud in the medium in which you will run it is super helpful. It's just really helpful. And I'm surprised more people aren't talking about it. Right? I'm surprised. I'm surprised there aren't groups of 4 GMs getting together online and saying, hey, I'd like to run you guys through this one little encounter. Let's go over it together. These are the mechanics that'll be in play. you play this kind of character, you play that kind of character, react a little bit. And you don't have to actually play it. You can just kind of play through it and talk about what's going to what might happen. And you're not doing this so that you're not surprised. You're still going to be surprised. You're doing this so that the words you use to describe that scene in the opening salvo of it are well-chosen words, so that you can set that scene. Because sometimes I look back on a scene and I'm like, I mentioned that there was a fountain, and I wish I had said that the fountain had a statue of the Weeping Lady in the middle of it, and that the water from the fountain were actually her tears. That's a neat detail. It's so, I love it. Why didn't I say that? Well, because I was thinking about 100 other things. That's why. And I wonder if I had taken a little bit of time and just gone over it with friends. And I'm not saying go over the whole game. No. Maybe even just go over the intro scene. Go over where you're going to start so that you can set things up just right. I think that needs to be a thing. GMs getting together to support themselves and go over their set pieces. Because maybe your game does have set pieces. Maybe a combat is coming. Awesome. How do you describe it? Do you have a good map? Have people look it over. Have people look it over who are strategy minded. So that's what I'm thinking about. GM rehearsal. Huh. Cool. I like that. The more it's coming out, the more I like it. And if you don't have a group of GMs who you can run it through, just talk it through with a friend who is not involved in the game. And I find actually talking it through and not writing it through is more valuable to me, because that's how it's going to come out in the game. Okay? All right. I've poured over my coffee. I'm ready to blend it. Let's get to the inspiration goat. Good one, inspiration goat. So, inspiration goat has handed me a movie that I recently rewatched called Brick, written and directed by Rian Johnson. It is a high school noir movie about crime and drugs and high school, and it's kind of brilliant. And one of the things I'm kind of amazed about it in the world building upon rewatching it recently is none of the teens, right? None of the kids in the movie seem childish, but they all are profoundly lonely, which I thought was interesting. And it got me thinking, and the movie itself got me thinking about tropes and way to blend tropes in to other types of genres, and how does that work in gaming? There are two places where I really think about that a lot. One is Star Wars. I feel like when I play Star Wars, I'm definitely not trying to play The Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. I want more the whoosh of a lot of whooshing. There's a lot of whooshing in Star Wars. I want the whoosh of the TIE fighter going by at high speed. I want the other whoosh, equally as good whoosh, almost as good whoosh of the lightsaber lighting up. I want a lot of whooshing. I want that vibe, and I don't necessarily want to try to recreate the movies. And I think a really good way to try to get into the Star Wars feel is to mix in another genre into it. And one way to do that is to think about the tropes. And how do you do that? One Star Wars thing I've always wanted to do is Reservoir Dogs, Reservoir Rebels, where you are a bunch of bank robbers on speeder bikes in Coruscant, robbing imperial banks, because robbing banks is kind of neat and exciting, and robbing imperial banks is a guilt-free operation generally. So that's fun. Definitely got thinking about blending other genres in with Star Wars, not only from Brick and because it's something that I like to do, but also because I recently heard an interview, and I'll put a link to it, with Rich Rogers and Jay over at Diceology, and I'll put a link to that podcast interview where Rich uses Cartel to play, which is an RPG about drugs and drug dealing cartels, and he uses it to play Hut Cartel, and he talks about. It's a really interesting conversation. I'm not going to get into it. Definitely give that click a listen. Let's get back to Brick. The other place I like to think about genre tropes is thinking about D&D, because the thing about D&D is it's not Lord of the Rings. It's its own fantasy genre. It has affected so many video games and so many books and so many movies and so many MMOs and so many board games in so many ways that it has become its own genre with its own tropes. And it's a good thing to think about that and think about what tropes you like and what tropes you don't. And I think that is something you want to, when you're thinking about a genre or when you are thinking about a movie and your game is inspired by it, and you say to someone, hey, I was talking about this with Strash the other day. If you really like Dune, and I really like Dune, that's not the end of the conversation. Because, number one, Dune is a glorious hot mess. And number two, there's so many different things to like about it. What was your entryway to Dune, right? How did you get into that? Was it the David Lynch movie? Was it the sci-fi TV series? Was it the book? Was it the book? Was it the original book? Was it the original book and all the sequels? Or just the original book? Because some people just stop. Was it the books written by his son? There's a lot of different entryways to Dune. And even if you just like the book, you still have to have a conversation about what you got out of the book. What is it you liked? Do you like the critique of messianic politics? Because for me, Dune, it's knife fights in space. Something about that. I feel like it's a whole genre unto itself. I have a Pinterest page called Knife Fights in Space. I feel like there's something there. I don't know quite what it is, but I know it when I see it in Pinterest, and I save it to my Knife Fights in Space page. I will have a link to my Knife Fights in Space Pinterest page. So what Brick got me thinking about was tropes and what you get out of them, how they can make the game better, how they can make the conversation about the game better, and what is it that you're liking about these tropes, or what is it that you like about this genre? What are the things that you kind of want to see when you're playing a game that is inspired by noir? What does that mean to you? That's not for me to answer. That's for me to ask. So if you have any thoughts on that, I would love to hear it. If you have a favorite genre movie that's very tropey and it has affected your gaming and inspired it, I'd love to hear more about it. So let's get to the outro. I'll talk to you more there. Thank you very much for listening. If you would like to support the podcast, there is a support the podcast button. You can click on that and see how that works for you. You can also purchase a copy of the Dictionary of Mu, which is a swords and sorcery setting supplement for the Sorcerer RPG. There will be a link to that in the show notes. And if neither of those work for you, that's fine. You can also continue the conversation. Sometimes I ask questions. Sometimes I put forward ideas. Maybe they inspire something in you. Maybe that is disagreement or agreement or a story about your own gaming. I would love to hear them. So if you want to drop me a tweet or an email, my Twitter link is in the show notes, and my email is judd.karlman@gmail.com. You can also just download the Anchor app and send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. I would love to continue the conversation. And I will take one of those emails or tweets or responses, and I will put it on a Wednesday reply show, and we can continue the conversation there. Or you can start your own podcast and send me a link and say, hey, I had to do my own thing because I have my own stuff to say. And if so, I would love to hear it. I'd love to hear what you have to say. So drop me a line. I hope your summers are going well and your creative endeavors are inspired and fruitful, and I will see you next week. Thanks for listening. No inspiration goats were harmed in the recording of this podcast. Inspiration goat is used with the permission of Janaki Parthasarathi.